Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the session on reskilling, upskilling, and new skilling to develop a resilient and productive workforce. The past few months have seen all of us, reorient our lives living indoors. We have seen businesses adapting by shifting operations completely online, and of course, we know that there are some organizations can that can go online, and there are a lot of organizations specific to India that cannot continue working online. So not only have our operations and our work from home continued remotely and online, we even learning has actually gone digital. However, we've also seen that some organizations and employees have been creaking under the pressure of working from home, being productive, with the constant changes that are happening every week, if not every day, with no end to the whole pandemic, with no certainty around inside. Being resilient and productive for our organization and at our workplaces has has basically come to the forefront today. At this junction, I would like to bring in my panelists, Ms. Chetna Munshi and Mr. Sanjay Singh, to share their views on how their organizations have taken steps to develop their employees, to engage with them and ensure that that the pressures that the organizations are facing and the employees and leaders are facing, it's really not showing a crack into our own organization system. Chetna leads global learning and development at Ericsson globally, and Sanjay is the Chief Human Resource Officer at UPL. So thank you for joining us, Chetna and Sanjay, and welcome to the session. Let me begin with a question that I typically ask both. I want to ask both of you is how has L&D changed over the last few months for you and your organizations, and what steps have you taken to develop resilience and productivity for your employees? So Chetna, want you to go first, and then I'll move on to Sanjay.
Sure. Niti, thanks for inviting, and giving me the opportunity to share my views. I think the pandemic has given us the opportunity as an employee and as an organization, L&D organization, to do things which we might probably be a little hesitant to do otherwise. That does not mean that we were not doing enough, but frankly, there are a lot of things which we are more, open to trying out, be it in terms of new methodologies, be it in terms of how we are trying to gauge the things and respond to it without much of a lag time. One of the things which this pandemic did, and I would say it's a positive thing, is uh, we've been trying, at least in India, I can say that because I have a global role, I also see other geographies. But for India specifically, trying to move at a large scale into a virtual delivery has been a kind of a not a smooth sailing for us, though I represent Ericsson. So Ericsson is a technology organization. However, the preference of our business leaders and stakeholders when it comes to learning still would be more of the traditional face-to-face mode, right? But I think this pandemic did not give us the opportunity to do much into that space, right? And hence, we all had to very quickly look at what are the other options while we've always had those options available with us. But maybe the scale and the time within which we had to roll it out, because in India, we are catering to more than 20,000 people within Ericsson. So doing it for that headcount or employee base in a span of less than a month required a lot of juggling at our end, to say the least. So yeah, so that's where I think I would I would get started.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Chetna. Sanjay, your industry and your organization is in stark contrast to Chetna's. right? So how have things been, at your organization in terms of people engagement, upskilling, learning, right? What has happened in the last few months?
Thank you, Chetna, and thank you for this opportunity to share our views with the participants. I would say that this COVID-19, I mean, after Spanish flu, has been the single biggest humanitarian crisis. Uh, but this every crisis for smart people also brings a lot of opportunities. And you know, you also see that during this particular crisis, and I'm watching stock markets, and my friends have got a lot of money in there, and they were worried that they will tank and they will fail, but they're minting money, especially in certain sectors like pharma and all that. And and when you have a crisis like this, then you become very clear of what you can do and what you cannot do. So you cannot go and sit in a bus like a typical Bombay city bus and travel. That's like inviting the worst thing for you. At the same time, what you really see is that if you are sick, you're sick. You can't do anything about it. And it's such a human thing that you would really take the risk of going to the hospital, get to the doctor. And if you go to the shop and the medicine prices have gone up because, profiteering is a very basic, motive for people. And these pharma companies are making money. Now, when you come to our sector, we are in the crop protection segment, we are in the agriculture sector. We are pretty international. I mean, more than 90% of our revenue comes from outside India. And one of the learnings we had that, the initial crisis started in Italy and France and Spain, and we have like 5 factories in France. Most of the borders were sealed. It led to a high level of, you can say nationalism and, protecting the self. But they always allowed the trucks carrying our stuff with seeds and crop protection chemicals, having a free movement because it pertained to food. So what we saw was something which was very counterintuitive to whatever was going on in the media, because all the governments were trying to support us, because the government said, okay, you usually get like 1 or 2 seasons to plant crops and produce food for the whole year. And if it is raining well, and if you stop anything at that particular point in time, maybe the whole country will suffer from a long-term perspective. So we did see that most of our businesses ran not with a major dent, but let's say 10-15% dent because of the supply chain issues. Uh, but we were fortunate enough, and we always said that, okay, you may not need to go to book my show or watch a movie or do something else, but you need food 3 times a day, and it's a human need. So I would say that we were in a human need thing. Purely from a HR perspective, and I can just vouch for my L&D head, I think it has been a super roller coaster ride, in the sense that there were a lot of expectations. Like, first of all, selling was going on as usual. If you really see the first quarter result of all the agriculture companies in India, somebody's grown by 20%, some 15. The smaller ones have even gone up by 50%. Uh, so the emphasis was on one thing, which is like start doing remote sales capability programs. So we partnered with somebody in Spain and ran global programs, because people really need frameworks, because it is not possible to call you to a classroom and train you and tell you how to go, what to do, but at least you need a framework. So it did not happen the way I'm telling you. We were trying and we were failing, right? They say, okay, it doesn't work in Spain, it is not working in China, it's not working there. But we finally have a very successful remote sales capability program with some 9 small modules, which also give them the option to customize it for the country and also do some country based training. What I would also say is that we were always on the top of the situation, and 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 for a face-to-face company like ours, it was a shock, because we were very used to like face-to-face. Our customers are farmers. Most of the farmers are fragmented farmers. They have small farm holdings. They really appreciate when you go and physically talk to them and you understand from them. They have a lot of questions because they don't keep too much cash in their pocket. For them, every dollar saved is a dollar saved for the family. But we saw a wonderful thing, which is, as soon as people were engaging with them, they were more worried about their own personal safety. So it led to a high climate of trust. And when we were trying to do this thing, and we started getting a lot of questions. And one of the question was that, are we going to learn something from this particular crisis, or or are we really going to, go back to the original self, which is like you, if you're not physically present, or if I don't see you physically, you're not effective. And we realize that what is really happening is that there is a complete focus on employee demanding for trust and employee demanding for empowerment. And we felt, oh my God, that's such a powerful thing, because in India, our profitability has gone up. In many markets, we are doing pretty well. So what I would say is that it was a crisis. It led to a disruption of the normal system. We kept trying. We did fail. We failed not only once or twice, we failed multiple times. But today we have got 3, 4 platforms. The platforms have got the basic 8, 9 modules, whether it is remote, selling capability, or whether it is doing, virtual, sale conferences. You will not believe, in Argentina, in Mexico, in India, we got like 700 people, or like up to 1,000, 1,100 people on Microsoft Teams to do the virtual sales convention. Because if you're a sales rep and if you don't have an annual convention, you're never excited. And we did take the help of the Microsoft teams, and I must acknowledge their help. And they really helped us organize, fantastic, sales conventions. So what we are really seeing is that we are learning from it, but it is also leading to two kinds of shift. One kind of shift is that earlier you had a discretion on how to pace these interventions. I think now as management, we are losing that discretion. Now the pace for digitization of learning initiatives, pace of digitization for most of the work is actually getting out of our control in a positive way, which is like there has to be a fast pace, because unless until every human being has a vaccine, people are going to be worried about their personal safety, and you don't want to cram people into a room till that particular point. So that was the first point, which is the pace of digitization. The second is learning is going to become a very platform oriented thing. So you create the base, but you add 2 more things. And this I'm saying 2 more things specifically because we learned it in the last 3 months. One is that let the local people do some customization with a local vendor on your platform. And the third is that if there is a need for a local trainer or a local leader to do some, face-to-face or virtual connect, let them do that actually. So, and these platforms have to be multilingual. So this is what our learning has been. And the overall context has been that learning and development is now being seen more closer to organizational change and organizational development, rather than just do something for these guys because they are struggling. No, it is actually becoming a part of our complete OD mechanism. I mean, I can just say that our L&D people are under so much stress because the expectations is too much. And why the expectation is too much is there is a reason, because the whole sector is pumping at its level best. If we have a good weather, and if it has rained very well in France this year, which it did not rain this year, the farmers don't want to lose that. So there's a lot of pressure on salespeople. So that's one bit I think that our learning people have done, pretty well. The other thing which I think they have done pretty well is that typically we had certain functionalities in our HR ERP system which were not being utilized so well, but now the level of utilization has really shot up by 7 times, 8 times. So we had this on SuccessFactors, MyPage collaboration tools that is being used wonderfully well. Like if let's say in sales, you're in India in sales, you have a lot of people, especially in Brazil, you have a lot of people. In France, you have limited people. In Italy, you have limited people. But they do come and they share their pictures, their ideas, their suggestions. So we also see that, learning is somehow getting very closely integrated with online collaboration where people are learning because they can't meet each other. And in certain countries which are very mature markets, you see customers are very demanding. You can't just dial a person and say, can I come and see you? You have to seek his permission because for him, his personal safety is very important. So I would say this crisis did not give us a choice. And that lack of choice along with the sectoral reality where we all need food every day led to certain mental shifts. The first mental shift was accelerating the pace of digitization of the processes, building learning platforms, then aiding it with collaboration tools so that employees feel equipped. That's where we are, but we are learning every day. And I think another thing that our L&D people are doing a lot is communication. I'm just seeing that they are becoming communication experts because You can have a content and you can host it online, but you have to go and explain and you have to tell people why it can't be customized, how much can be customized, what can you do with your local vendor, who is the local vendor, how will you integrate with this people that were giving platform. So they are spending a lot of time in stakeholder management and the first communication to people. So I think it was a long answer, but for us, I think it has been a great learning, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and it
I
has
think
helped.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely, Sanjay. I think what couple of things that you said resonates, to me as well. Is that not only did this pandemic bring out an opportunity for all of us, but I think it just shook many of us from status quo. I mean, it was always about this is how things have been, continues, and why change, or I don't think it'll ever work if you change. But suddenly, like even what Chetna mentioned, that even learning went virtual, for and where most business leaders and most employees would stay away from virtual learning or self learning. But here it is that we adopted change. And I think specific to India, I think adoption of technology moved up by 2 decades. We would have never dreamt that we would be doing this cross country a full day session, digitally, wherein we are getting about 26, 27, or 30 odd panel speakers across country, and actually maybe someone, there are one or two are from outside the country as well. We would typically have hired a hotel, to done a full day session, but things are changing for everyone, right? And like you said, you mentioned about your L&D team, and this is something that also I have heard from many other L&D leaders. And I think, Chetna, I would now come to you here. That the L&D function has probably been the busiest in the last few months, right? It has picked up pace. So not only has it done a check box that continue engaging with employees, but I think business leaders have reached out to L&D saying, this is what we need, and asking L&D to take certain actions and take it forward. Has that been your experience, and what specifically has your organization done to ensure that that your employees continue to remain upskilled and reskill basis the current requirement of skill sets?
Absolutely. I think completely resonate with most of what Sanjay said, though it's a completely different sector and a vertical compared to where I am. A couple of things here. As I said, nobody was given probably a choice whether you want to or you don't want to move into the new reality, right? It was like sink or swim. You have to do it, else probably you become redundant, or organization compels you to do it, which in a way, as I said earlier also, lot of what we were used to doing had to be literally turned over its head, because that was no longer a viable option for us. So if I talk about Ericsson and what we have been trying to do, yes, if I talk about myself as well as my team, we have never had so many connects with our stakeholders each day like we've had in the last 3 to 4 months. And it's not that it wasn't done earlier, but because everything has literally changed overnight. For example, we do, we go back to our stakeholders typically every month to kind of, start planning for what are the kind of requirements, pipeline projects, and start kind of, looking at a 3, 4, 6 months kind of a time span. But with this pandemic coming, it not only shook the entire business planning, and not only in India, but worldwide, because all of our customers, because of the new reality, had to relook at what they would prioritize and what they may not want to prioritize for now, which was very different than the kind of projections we had even probably 2 months before that, right? So in a way, the business projections had to be redone in many cases. The sales pipeline had to be relooked because a lot of priorities were shifted. Some things which were not a priority became suddenly a priority number one. And something which was seen to be a priority probably moved down the priority list, right? Which again meant that for my team, we had to constantly be in engagement, in conversation with our stakeholders to know now in the new situation, what still remains, what moves out, what moves in. That was one side of it. So the entire consulting piece of the L&D in a way had to be redone, which we typically would have already done 3 months prior. The second one, and more basic, I would say, from an L&D standpoint, is the entire solution portfolio that we had to be relooked and redesigned. Because as I said, we earlier had a very heavy reliance on people coming in doing a face-to-face session. Now that opportunity was no longer available with us. So all my content, all my engagement, and more importantly, we also have to remember that my entire ecosystem is too used to having people in front of them and doing things in a particular manner. Now we don't have that option. So I think the toughest thing which we had to kind of look around and kind of come to terms is, how do you keep the audience engaged in a virtual session beyond an hour or two, right? If we were doing a day-long session, we know the attention span of anybody is not more than a few minutes in a virtual platform, right? Now, yes, we have a lot of technologies, like we also use MS Teams and we use Adobe Connect, a lot of other technologies. But earlier, even when these technologies and platforms were available, frankly, nobody really spent a lot of time in exploring the various functionalities that those platforms had already with it, right? Now, we spend so much of time in knowing, okay, so you have a whiteboard in MS Teams, so let's explore that. You have a breakout option room in different tools, let's explore that, right? At the end of the day, what we were trying to do is, how do I not compromise on the engagement? How do I not compromise on the takeaways and effectiveness of what I'm trying to do? Because that's on one side. And on the other side, as I said, it was a big mind shift change for my stakeholders, because everybody was doing something they were not familiar with, right? So you had to literally overnight work on multiple things simultaneously, on your solutioning, on your engagement on the audience level, giving the confidence to the stakeholders that this new mode, or not so new mode, but now a new mode, will actually work. We had a lot of stakeholders who took some time to warm up to this idea of doing a full day session or even a half day session in a completely virtual mode, because that was something they were not convinced would work. And when you are spending your money and releasing your people from a customer engagement projects, you need to be very sure that it's going to give you some outcome at the end of that 1 day, 2 day that a person is going to be released for, right? So we had to literally work on multiple fronts for many, many, many days and weeks and months to reach a level where we could actually throw up a couple of use cases and go back to the stakeholders to say, these are the 10 things which have worked well, right? Because it's a constant rediscovering, with failures, with some successes, redefining, retuning, refining at the same time to say, okay, this worked, this didn't work as well. In the new reality, now let's do this. For example, induction. We still are hiring every month at least 500 to 700 people in India across Ericsson. So all those new people have to be taken through the Ericsson induction process, which was again a face-to-face. We overnight, in a span of 2 weeks, again converted that into a completely virtual experience across the country. So the first instance, when we rolled it out, yes, there were certain learnings. We fine-tuned it in the next instance. So it is kind of a constant looking, relooking, and relearning, even an upskilling, I would say, for L&D. I think it's been a huge upskilling in the last 3 months to 4 months that this pandemic has given us an opportunity. So yes, to what Sanjay said, every crisis definitely gives you an opportunity. Now it's for us to see how do we leverage and use that opportunity to our advantage and to our company's advantage? Otherwise, you decide to take it head on, or you decide to wail away and say, okay, now there's nothing that I can do about it.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think this, being ready for a constant change now is something that we need to keep thinking about, because like you said, what we planned, probably in Jan and Feb is not being implemented. In fact, it just went out of the window by mid-March.
Absolutely.
Right. And what we did plan in April for the quarter didn't work either, because things kept changing and we really don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Right. And I think so that brings me to my next point to you, Sanjay, is that I was reading somewhere that the C-suite hiring is now focusing a lot more on resilience as a skill, right? As against what it used to be pre-COVID. So is it true? I mean, is it that now we're looking at leaders and managers to be more resilient? I mean, what's your take on the whole thing, and why is it now and why wasn't it earlier? And then I'll come to my my the next question to
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and we did a fair bit of research on this particular topic, and we tried to define what do we really mean by resilience. How do you decide, okay, Sanjay is not resilient, but let's say Anand is resilient or Sam is resilient? And when we really got into this definition, we came across two or three concepts in the COVID-19 pandemic. So the first concept which came was that something happens, you have a prediction and it fails completely. So Elon Musk had a higher conviction in his views when he said, I'm going to run with my practice. I don't care about what the president says, because it's a normal thing, it will go away, because it has not happened in the last 100 years. And he had a point of view, and he's Elon Musk, right? But it did not turn out to be true. And the president of US had a particular view, and different people had different views. Some were very conservative, some were very bold and aggressive. And you see the conservatives actually won the day, because the crisis turned out to be far more serious than people thought. It had the potential. So different people go different way. What we learned in UPL are three things. The first thing is that, do you really avoid getting too much into intuitive guesses and try to talk to experts, try to do some database guesses? That's the first thing that you do. The second thing which we did was that we say, okay, there is a crisis, learn it as per the day or as per the week, have a response, fail, no problem, just keep failing, but then come with something better next day. That was our second point. The third point that we made was that if you have a crisis, the way crisis pans out in, let's say, Gurgaon is different from the way it pans out in Mumbai. And definitely it's very different in Mexico City as compared to Moscow, because different governments also have different norms. I mean, we had countries where president went and hugged kids just to protest against the governors. So the third thing what we did was we said, it is decentralized. Don't check with us. You have a problem, you know the situation, you understand what the regulator is saying, you know what is the government saying. Don't check with us. If you have to invest something, do invest in it. If your people don't have an extra COVID care, invest in it. If you are making people run the factories, if you have to do something special, please go ahead and do it. So that's the third thing we did, which is like decentralized, that you are empowered to run the way you deem fit, because we sitting here will never come to know what is really happening and how the situation is actually unfolding. But the fourth was the key thing. The fourth key thing was that, because irrespective of the fact that we are fifth largest in the sector, and we have 90% revenues coming from outside India, it's a very promoter driven company. So the message to them was that, let us not lose the care capacity, which is, given a choice, we will invest in employees, support them, decentralize it, listen to them, rather than trying to become more tough on that. So suppose, and we have like the two examples. One, somebody in the factory is coming all the day because the factories are running, and somebody is not coming because he's saying, okay, my spouse is saying and all this. We said, okay, hear him out. Let him stay at home. So don't force people for the time being. So the main point was that take steps to ensure that you really care. So we said, we care should be our broad theme, and within which you really need to have your response systems which are completely decentralized. So let's say our Vietnam factory, they went for some air tunnels where you spray people. Later on, we learned that, okay, WHO doesn't approve air tunnel as a scientific way, to sanitize a person. We said, okay, stop it, go and do something, which is compliant. So I would say resilience essentially means what? Being on the ball, understand the crisis, partner with experts, come with a response, and keep handling the crisis. Because it's a humanitarian crisis, your concept has to be employees first, which is human safety first, human health first, also human care first. Care is essentially nothing but saying we will hear you out. We will not try to police you. We will not try to create a mandate. We will not tell you that because 100 people are turning up in the factory, you don't have a right. We will talk to you, the care capacity, and that's how we will learn. So I would say that resilience to me would essentially mean that understanding the situation, learning and reshaping your responses, remaining flexible, talking to the experts, and keep improving. And I think and not losing your emotional control, not panicking, and communicating all the time, and yet not getting into saying that I was always right. So I think to us that's very important, and that was our first message from day one. I mean, even we did not anticipate on 11th and 12th of March how bad it would be.
Yeah.
But by the time it hit our French factories, we really completely changed our thinking, and we came with this notion of care capacity and decentralization, and empowering people to do what they think right, and put that in that order of employees first, and the other steps.
Sure, sure. But Chetna, is resilience a skill and a muscle that can be taught, can be built over a period of time, or like many cognitive skills, it has to come from within?
I think it's a lot to do with, in my experience, it's a lot to do with what is the culture of the organization, and particularly what's your leadership, how are they demonstrating it happening or not happening, or is it important, right? In case of Ericsson, one of the things which everybody, and we are 100,000, employee base across the 132 countries. So it's a huge, very diverse and spread across different countries. But one thing which all of us, and this is not limited to the pandemic, but even before that, our CEO has been and constantly continues to engage and talk his heart out to the employees through his weekly newsletters. So all the values like resilience, how important, as I said, is it for even in this crisis to know what is the customer's landscape demanding in the new situation? Because if we continue to do what we were doing and assume that this is what is going to be required by my customers, that is not a reality anymore. As I said, within a span of a month, we realized whatever planning so-called we had done is completely invalid and out of the window. And that came from the fact that all our customers and our sales and our delivery folks were in constant touch with them to understand how do we enable our customers to do what they need to do in the best possible way, which meant that how is the rest of the organization going to gear up to make that happen? And that's what I would say is resilience. You can't live in the past because that past was glorious. And that gave you a definitive path that you decided to walk on. So I think the first thing is how closely are you grounded to what the realities are, whether it's a customer reality, whether it's your own stakeholder reality. So from an HR/L&D standpoint, the amount of time all of us in the entire HR have spent on listening to our employees, be it their personal crisis that all of us have had in the last 3 months. Working from home has not been tried out at this scale, at least in India, ever before. And all of us with kids, with our parents, with our entire support system, some being there, some not being there, but still managing, and our productivity levels actually have gone up in the pandemic as compared to before, right? So nobody kind of allowed the ball to be dropped, as they say, right? So we knew the reality, we knew what is required to be done, and that is where I say the communication and the expectation from the very top leaders comes in as a critical asset, because you know this is important, you know this needs to be prioritized, and then you have to decide what and how you need to work around it to get the required outcome.
So you're saying resilience, some part of it has to come from within, and some part of it can be taught and handheld
And
as we go.
absolutely, and I think it is also the ecosystem in which you are working.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, keeping an eye on the clock, one last question to both of you is what is it that you would want to leave as a parting shot for your, colleagues in the industry on what would you do going forward on reskilling, upskilling, and providing new skills to your workforce so that they become more resilient and productive?
I mean,
So,
I'll go very quick on
yeah.
this. I would say that there are going to be two fundamental shifts, especially the way I handle L&D. I think there has to be a platform-based approach so that you create it for the whole world, and people should have some right to customize it, but create like a global technical capabilities, like how all of us use Facebook and Google for our needs. Uh, that I think is going to fundamentally shift. The other would be to have some data-based approach to find out what are the high skills or skills which are in future need. Because it seems that when you're working remotely, the manager or the top guy really needs to be an expert, in managing the team and managing the tasks. So I would say that keep focusing and keep talking to the business on focusing on the high or the critical skill for managing a virtual team. That would be the second thing. And third is my own personal point of view, which I think that if you don't see somebody face to face, maybe project management becomes very important. I think the formal organization structures will be weakened, but even if in L&D or in even business HR, I can say, okay, do this project and move on to another project, which is what IT company and fintech companies follow. So I think an emphasis on project management and project based organization would be the third priority.
Sure, thanks. I think very, very valid points. Chetna, your thoughts?
See, in addition to what Sanjay said, two things which I can add on is one, it's extremely important to understand the significance of informal learning. I think we have not, as an industry, done enough, maybe because there were so many options available and so on. But I think with this new situation coming in, I still feel it is not very effective to do formal learning for an extended period without coupling it with informal learning. And when I say informal learning, it is experiential learning, it's on the job learning, it's peer coaching, it's all the other things which are extremely critical, relevant, and at the same time, they have to be done with the right intent, with the right focus, with the right outcome. So
Right.
if you are able to tie up, why are you doing it? What is the objective? Who is the person who is the best person who we should be roping in to ensure that those outcomes are getting delivered? It may be, with the current team, it may be some person from outside the team who you may be pitching in and getting to get that, outcome to be driving that outcome. That's one. And second is bite-sized learning.
Yeah.
I think gone are the days, even before pandemic. I mean, I come from an era where it was very normal to do trainings for days together, 5 days, 7 days at a stretch, right? Now with a virtual learning and platforms and engagement being the way to go, you have to ensure that all your solutions, all your engagements are done in a manner where you are able to retain the attention of your audience. And that's where you have to use your platforms and your technology to the that you can. So explore what are the options that are available, what are the features that are available. We have excellent platforms and tools available. Many of them do not have a hefty cost attached to it as well.
Yeah.
But it is probably lack of time at our end when we are not able to maximize it. But I think this is a golden opportunity for us to use those and do it. And one of the learnings, as I said, when we did a virtual induction was, it was fantastically received.
Mhm.
We were skeptical because it was a one full day and we were engaging with close to about 50 to 80 to even 100 participants in that whole day. It was about 7-8 sessions that you do. And we were
Yeah.
very skeptical whether we will be able to pull it off.
Yeah.
Right? But if you have the right thought that you put into it as to how, so engagement has to be kept in mind very clearly. Outcome has to be kept in mind. How do you want to drive it? And get the right people who can make these different levers happen at the right time. So I think if you're able to do that, probably it's not so difficult.
Yeah, I think absolutely right. And from what I hear both Sanjay and Chetna you speak, platform-based learning will be the way forward, right? I mean, using technology. Obviously, when we've been thrown into using technology the last few months, and now I guess we need to keep reinventing better platforms, more effective and efficient forms of learning. And Chetna, you said outcome-based learning, which is probably the need of the hour now, even more, but I think it has been the case even in the past. I mean, I'm not sure whether people saw outcome based learning as the way of life, but I think it's going to be the way forward for us very very clearly. And the last thing, that just to summarize, I think what you said, Chetna, is I think the 10-20-70 model is here to stay. I mean, you cannot do anything in silos in classrooms or virtual but not have a on the job experience or peer learning experience. I think that's going to change, but probably the pedagogy and the models of learning may change.
Yeah.
And I think we will keep reinventing those models and pedagogies, I think, for the next many months or many years, because of the situation we have got ourselves into. So I think we have some time for Q&As before we wind up. So Pinang, would you want to just take this through?
Sure, Niti. So this question is for anybody, Sanjay or Chetna, whoever would like to take this question. It is from Nestor. I'll just read the question verbatim. So it says, how can you get a buy-in from the line managers and HODs to believe in the learning and development of people because they are so busy with their daily activities?
Chetna, you go.
Okay.
I've already answered it a million times.
See, I don't think it is any different now than it has been in the past. My only mantra, if I may say, is you will only be given an audience if what you are talking makes sense and is of interest to the person who you are talking to. You may be knowing your stuff inside out, but till you don't put it and merge it with the needs of the person at the other end, he or she will not give you the time beyond the first engagement, probably. So you have to steal that time, and they will only give you that opportunity if what you have said makes sense to them and is of interest to them. So you have to do your homework. You have to know where is that person coming from. You have to understand the business dynamics. You have to understand what is not working or where are the challenges that this particular stakeholder is facing, and then come up with how are you going to help them meet those business realities and make them more of. So you have to basically merge your solutions with the challenges that they are facing. It cannot be two separate tracks, that here is my L&D solution, but your problems will come to that later. You have to hear them out. Better still, you should be able to go with them with the 3 challenges which you are already aware about. Work your conversation on those points. I don't think it'll be very difficult, because what you are talking is of interest and makes sense to that individual. They will be more than happy to partner with you, irrespective of how busy they are, because you are talking to them on things which matter to them.
Sure, Chetna, there is one more question which is asked specifically of you. Okay, so if you can share any tips, that you used and you would like to share in terms of converting a physical induction program to a virtual induction program. If somebody is trying to do that, what are some of the tips you would like to share?
So what we did was, of course, you have to have a good technology or a platform you're going to be using. We use MS Teams. But what we realized was, as I said earlier also, earlier we used to have multiple speakers come in one by one, in a particular schedule and a sequence and deliver their different sessions. So it is generally a day which is covering about 7 to 8 sessions. This time what we did was we condensed and made each session smaller. So what we did was the format that we typically used was we did some download of that particular session, followed by a Q&A. And at the same time, we also had at the back some of the assets or resources or links that were readily available for people to go through in case there were the questions which were beyond the time that we could cater to them. So the opportunity that we got, and in a lot of cases, we had the sessions that were pre-recorded, because getting the availability of all the speakers that you want is not always going to be possible. So what we did was the right speakers, if we were not able to get their time, we pre-recorded their sessions and we only invited them for the Q&A part, maybe for 10 minutes. So if it was a half an hour session, 15 minutes of the session probably was pre-recorded. Then 5 to 10 minutes was the Q&A session, and remaining, it was more like giving them the links and the other resources that they could refer to. Third is we built a lot of audio, video, stories, and other things into it. So it wasn't a PPT. So it wasn't a lift and shift. So if earlier we were doing mainly PPTs, we converted that into stories, we converted that into audios, we converted that into videos, we converted that into different formats. Online polls, we use a lot of online polls. So you have to use different mechanisms, because as I said, at the back of the mind, we were very clear that keeping the engagement very high was the only way we would be able to sustain it and weave your solution around it.
Yeah, and I think, Chetna, I completely agree with you. I think if the engagement in any learning format is not there, I don't see whether it's virtual or even face-to-face is going to be effective. And I think as L&D professionals, what's important is to work backwards, is to see what is the effectiveness of what I'm doing, and what is it that the business gets an impact, rather than, oh, this is what I want to do. And, that's it. So I guess, we are already overshot 1:30. So thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Chetna, for your time. Thank you, all the participants, for joining us for this session.